And this will clarify a question that Tricia had last time, which I assume was also a question with all of you, and is how do you go from a week to turning weeks into years, or turning one day into 1,000 years? We've already looked at Psalm 90 and verse 4 and 2 Peter 3 verse 8, which tells us that with the Lord one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. So very often in studying prophecy, we chart out into the future in 1,000-year periods. But here in Numbers 14 and verse 34, it gives us a biblical example that the Israelites had sent spies into the promised land for what, 40 days? And 40 days they came back, and Joshua and Caleb had a good report, but the rest of the spies had an evil report. And because of that, God judged them, and here's what he said is going to happen to you. Chapter 14, let's look at verse 33. And your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses are wasted in the wilderness. After the number of the days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day now for a year, shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and you shall know my breach of promise, or how you've altered my purpose. I had a plan to take you in, you messed it up, and now you're going to pay for it. 40 days of searching the promised land, instead of entering in and following my order to enter into the promised land, instead you balked against that, so I'm going to judge you a year for each day. Is that right? A day for a year. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 9. He says that 70 years are determined for Israel while they were in Babylonian captivity. To the very day, I'm sure, God brought them out after 70 years because God's a faithful God. To the day. Now when he talks about this coming 70th week, he's telling us that that week, which normally would be 7 days, instead is going to be just as it was for the Israelites who went in to spy out the land, a day for a year. So now we're looking at 70 weeks of days. No, these become weeks of years. So in verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. So verse 24 says 70 weeks. If you look at the chart in front of you, there's 490 days. 70 times 7 would be 490 days. The word weeks there could easily be translated sevens rather than weeks, just periods of sevens. 70 weeks or 490 days is now extrapolated out into 490 years. So from the signing of the decree of Artaxerxes until Messiah the Prince is 69 weeks. On your graphic here, you'll see the line to the left, which you could look at as in Ezra chapter 1 and in Nehemiah chapter 2. The theologians date that at May 14th of 445 BC. So that far left vertical line is May 14th, 445 BC. It says now in the next verse, verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem, not the commandment to rebuild the temple, Cyrus gave that command, but this is the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 and 62 equals 69. The street shall be built again, the wall even in troublous times. Verse 26, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. If you just walked in and started reading this, you would be so lost. So you got to dice this down into different sections. So verse 25, know and understand that from the going forth of this command, May 14th, 445 BC, to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So these first 7 weeks, 7 times 7 is 49. There are 49 years that it took to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. That isn't real germane to what we're talking about on Daniel's 70th week, but it meant a lot to the people that were living at that time, because shortly after Daniel was here, then that decree was given, and in short order, actually 49 years, but in short order regards to dispensations of times, the city of Jerusalem was rebuilt. The walls of the city, according to Nehemiah, were built in 52 days, but the whole rebuilding of the city was 49 years. So from that time, another 62 weeks or another 434 years from them till Messiah the Prince. Let's go back to verse 25. The command to restore and build rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks plus 62 weeks, which is 69 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And you'll remember, if you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, this was a real battle getting the city rebuilt. And then verse 26, but after 62 weeks, does your Bible just say 69 years? I'm reading Old English here.
62 sevens.
62 sevens. After 62 sevens shall Messiah, which implies that he will be here at that time, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Now the verse before says 62 weeks unto Messiah the Prince. If you date that, and I'm not going to take time here to do that, but it comes out at April 6, 32 AD. I've got probably 10 books in my library on the book of Daniel. Each of them gives detail on the exact timing on when Messiah the Prince entered into the city of Jerusalem. And April 6, 32 AD, if it comes out at that at 360-day Jewish years, adding leap years and so forth, it comes out to that very day. So we are assuming that that is the day that Messiah the Prince rode into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey, and everybody started saying, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." All of this is fulfilled there. For people that say that the Bible can't be trusted, the Bible isn't true, well, you could find a lot of places in the Bible where they would have reason to say that, even though I could prove them differently. But here's one place where you can't prove them different, because this is all historical, written by somebody 2,600 years before us to the detail. Okay? Zechariah 9:9, Psalm 118:26, Luke 19:38. When Jesus said, "If you would have known in this your day," Jesus spoke to the very day that I came into this city, and the people didn't receive him. And because they didn't receive him, the 70th week was not fulfilled. God turned his gaze to the Gentiles and cut off his dealings with Israel as a people at that time, and brought in this segment of time here. You can put a cross right there by that line. And that's from the signing of the decree till Jesus comes and Messiah is cut off. Messiah is what? Cut off. That's the death of Jesus Christ. That would have been that same Passover, the week after he came into town. Then Passover week started and Jesus was cut off. Back to our text. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. That's for you and me. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That happened in AD 70. So right to the right of this little line here, you can write 70 AD. And so all of these prophecies were fulfilled. Now there's a big gap. We call it a prophetic gap. Whoever did this chart, I didn't do it. I took a picture of it and then just printed it. It says prophectic gap, whatever a prophectic gap is. Anybody know what a prophectic gap is? You have to look that one up. I don't know what that is. So you can cross out the C if you want to. I just noticed that. A prophectic gap. Okay, now this gap is when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And there is 1 week, the 70th week, after the 69th week, that is prophetic and out in the future. So this chasm of time between those two vertical lines is the church age. The times of the Gentiles, or the dispensation of the Spirit that we are in. We have gone now not quite 2,000 years. When people say year 2000 or the new millennium, they're looking back towards Jesus' birth, not towards his death. So when you start projecting 2 days or 2,000 years out into the future, it's not from Jesus' birth, it's from his death. His death closes the old covenant. Amen. His death fulfills everything in verse 24. Go back there again. To finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Well, that hasn't all happened yet. It was finished on the cross, and yet we still see everything in that verse still happening in our world today, right? Has any of that stopped yet? To finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. It's getting worse and worse. And so we are looking at a worsening of iniquity and so forth in our planet. So that means we're not in the 70th week. Whatever he's prophesying here now is out in the future. So 2,000 years from Jesus, AD 32, or exactly what it is, we don't know for sure, but that's a good projection. So that would make 2,000 years out at 2032. We're not setting dates, but what we are setting is that we are in a predicament as a planet if we don't turn to Jesus Christ, because this thing is winding down. And the times of the Gentiles, and we looked at that last time in Luke 21 and 24, he said the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled. This thing doesn't go on forever, and we don't have forever to get done what God's called the church to get done, because this thing's about to move back to his covenant promise to his natural people, Israel. Now let's look at that final 70th week. Back in our text, Daniel 9:26, then there will be the city and the sanctuary shall be destroyed, and not one stone left upon another, just as it says in Matthew 24, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. I don't think he's talking about a physical flood in the highlands of Jerusalem, but rather a flood of armies coming in from Titus and the Roman armies. And under the end of the war, desolations are determined. Terrible things are going to happen in the city of Jerusalem to the Jewish people, so that in 70 AD people are running for the hills. And Jesus said, when this begins to happen, don't go back to take anything out of your house, flee. And as a result, the Jewish people have fled all over the world. By 140 AD, there was very, very few Jews still in the land. They spread to Russia and spread all through Europe and ultimately to the ends of the world, but mostly in the Russian, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and then into the Western nations that opened up in America and Britain and different places. But now, May 14th, there's another May 14th. 1948, you can put that on the left side of this line, because before this last week can happen, the Israelites have to be a nation again. This entire period of 2,000 years, or 1948 minus 70 AD, so this 1900 years of time here, Israel was dispersed amongst the nations. But now in 1948, they're back in their homeland. The Star of David is raised up on the flagpole, and Israel becomes a state again. Isaiah 66 and verse 8 said, "Who's ever heard of a thing? Can a nation be born in a day?" And yet in one day's time, the impossible happened, and all of the people that for 2,000 years have said this Bible is not true because of all of the promises that are in there about Israel and 2,000 years of proof, the Bible isn't true. But God proves himself, if only in one 24-hour period of time, and everything now covenanted with God is ready to be fulfilled. People that were believers, even though they couldn't see the nation of Israel, you can go back through the old sermons of the Spurgeons and Moody's and everybody, they preached that God was going to fulfill his covenant and that the nation of Israel would be back in their homeland. That is faith, because that's a faith and a trust in something that we can't see. You and I today are doing the same thing, because we can't see this 70th week, but we preach it, we believe it, we stand on it, and we live our lives accordingly. That's faith. We can't see it. Now let's go to this last set of brackets here and look at this 70th week. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And he, this prince, coming of the people of the prince that shall come, verse 26. This is not only talking about Titus in 70 AD, this now becomes a dual prophecy that looks to the end of the church age and the people of the prince that shall come. The people are what? The Romans, or the Roman Empire. So that predicts in verse 26 that there will be a revived Roman Empire. And we don't see it right now, but we are seeing the chaos in the nations that is creating this last final kingdom. And the prince that shall come. In other words, there will be not a king over this kingdom, but a prince. A prince rises up and takes over. And so this is Daniel's little horn that comes up amongst 10 horns and becomes the tyrant of it all. He shall destroy the city and the sanctuaries. That's not only then, this is something that's also going to come, because wars and desolations are determined clear to the end. So now when we look at this final thing, there's going to be attacks against Israel all through this. We have seen it since 1948. A consortium of nations attacked Israel. In 1967, they attacked it again. And in 73, they attacked it again. And Psalm 83 still is yet to be fulfilled. And now we've seen Hamas, Hezbollah, and everything attacking it. And now they're getting nations in a coalition together that soon will bring the Gog and Magog attack against it. So he's saying that to the end, that there are wars determined against the city of Jerusalem. Okay, now verse 27, but he, this prince that shall come, we know him as the Antichrist. Verse 27, he is who?
Antichrist.
The Antichrist, or he opposes Christ. Antichrist is a term that we use, but there's all different numbers of names that could be used for him. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Everything that God promised them that they could do in the Temple Mount and in the temple and in the restored Jerusalem, he now confirms that covenant. It's in writing now. And he will write this covenant for 7 years, 1 week. It's not that it couldn't be written for longer or for shorter, but there is going to be a political movement and gathering, and we believe it's sooner than later, when a covenant or a contract is going to be signed between nations that allows Israel to restore their worship on the Temple Mount and their worship even as it was in the Old Testament. And these things are ready. Yesterday we watched a great discovery on the subject of the Ark of the Covenant in Jeremiah's grotto, which was just amazingly fascinating. And so we believe all of the things that are involved in temple worship are there, have been reserved, and are ready to be brought out soon. And there will be a 7-year period of time, and in the middle of that week, 3.5 years, that covenant will be broken. So this week is what? 7 years. Look at verse 27, and in the midst of the week. Midst is what? Middle. That's where we get our first half and second half of the tribulation period. In the midst of the week, which is 7 years divided by 2 is 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, or times and the dividing of time. In the midst of the week, he, the Antichrist, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. I mean, he steps in and says, no more need for your sacrifices. I am the one that your sacrifices point to. I am your Messiah. They accept him as that until the middle of the week, when he goes in and desecrates the temple or the Holy of Holies by going in and declaring that he is God. And then everything in Revelation chapter 13 is instituted. The mark of the beast, the number of the name, the image of the beast, this abomination of desolation, this object, this unholy thing that is placed in the temple, whether it is a clone of the Antichrist, whether it is some artificial intelligence that looks like him. They're making humanoids today that are exact. I mean, you can't tell them apart. They're getting to where they're getting the snapback and the feel of the texture of skin. It won't be long before they have a complete, perfect replica of a human being that can not only act as a human being, can have emotions they're trying to work on, or at least program like human beings, and ultimately to be able to have all of the knowledge of artificial intelligence, where that thing can be what the devil has always wanted to be, and that is what? Omniscient, omnipresent, to be able to have control over all people and nations and kindreds and tongues. That is coming. We're not going to explain all of that right now. But then it says, and he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, or in other words, this abominable thing, this abominable act, this detestable thing is going to be placed in the temple, and it will make everything desolate, even until the consummation, or clear to the end that is determined, and God's going to pour out his judgment upon this Antichrist, this beast, and his system. And this ends where? This 7-year period, you can put a line down the center of it and write mid-trib. You can write 1,260 days. But then at the end, farthest to your right, Then we have the appearing of Jesus Christ, the return, the quote, apocalypse or unveiling that we've already read about in Zechariah chapter 14 and Joel chapter 3, and at the end of the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. Praise God. That day is what? The day of the Lord. You guys talked about that last week, so I'm not going to get into that, but that's number 20. On a second part of our teaching today, let's go to number 21 and then number 22. These could be turned around because the days of Noah are before the days of Lot. I don't know why I put them in that order. We probably should flip them around. So 21 should be days of Noah because it precedes 22 days of Lot. But let's go to Luke chapter 17 and look at the days of Lot, and we'll jump back to days of Noah next week. But I want to get into this because this is pretty interesting stuff. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be coming at the Son of Man. We all know that. We've all heard sermons on that. We've all studied that. Fewer have studied Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 28. Likewise, which means just as it was in the days of Noah. Really, this is improper to study this verse because the days of Noah is prior to that. But this is just where I want to jump in at today. Verse 28, likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. You know, with Noah it said that they ate and drank and married and were given in marriage. But this gives a whole list of things that they were doing, which means that the presumption in that day far outnumbered those in Noah's day. In other words, when man gets numb to God, it only worsens with time. So as it was in the days of Noah, judgment came, but in the days of Lot, it was like they cared even less. Sin had even worsened. And so they did what? They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. We could go through every one of them and try to see exactly what that means. In other words, they were really commercial minded, they were money minded, they ate, they were gluttons, they drank, there was just a party spirit in the air everywhere. You could add anything to that opiates the mind, drugs, everything else. They bought, they sold. In other words, we live like we're living forever. It doesn't matter. There's nothing to hinder us. We've got the world under control. They planted, they builded. In other words, planted is what? They're looking for a long-term harvest. Jesus is not coming back. That's the spirit of our day to day. And they builded, and they builded, and they builded, and they builded. And so that's just a spirit of indifference. There's such an indifference today, so commercialized. But the same day, verse 29, and this is exactly as it was in the days of Noah. They knew not until the day that the flood come. Everything erupted. And here, the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven. Many will use this as a portrait of the rapture because it was the same day that he went out of Sodom that fire and brimstone from heaven fell. But once again, this is not speaking about 7 years. This could be at any time during the tribulation period that God rescues his people, and judgment and fire and brimstone falls upon this society and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. And he says in verse 31, in that day he which shall be upon the housetop and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. He that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. In other words, there's nothing in this world that is worth putting ahead of being ready for the coming of Jesus Christ. And verse 32 says, remember Lot's wife. That's the second shortest verse in the Bible. There's two, Jesus wept and rejoice evermore. Those are the two-word verses in the Bible. But here's a third one that's nearly as short. Remember Lot's wife. I want us to go back to Genesis chapter 19 and just walk through this and see what the signs were in Lot's day. Everybody say Lot. How do you pronounce that? Lut. It's L-O-T is pronounced Lut. I preach for my Indian friends who speak the same translations of O words as you would in any Middle Eastern country, or in clear down to India, it's always an U. So I'm preaching along and say Lot this and Lot that, and they stop and they just, you can see the terror in their eyes. What does Lot have to do with what he's talking about? So I have to remember that they pronounce it Lut, which would be also the proper way for us to pronounce it. We pronounce names incorrectly in the West.
So Moses would be Moshe?
Well, Moshe and that, but just to pronounce the word as it's written in English, but a word like Jairus. Let's take Jehovah Jireh. That's Jehovah Hirah. Anyway, we're going to keep saying things the way we say them, otherwise people don't know what we're talking about. But let's go back to Genesis 19, and there came two angels to Sodom at evening. There had been three personages that had appeared to Abraham in the chapter before, when Abraham was saying if there's 10 righteous in the city, or if there's 5 righteous, or he's making this bargain trying to intercede on behalf of the people he knew that was in the city, was Lot and Lot's wife and Lot's daughters and their sons-in-laws. There were 3. Here there are 2. We assume that of these 3, it could have been an actual theophany, an actual appearance of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, 3. Or it could have been that Jesus was there with 2 angels. And so here in chapter 19, verse 1, 2 of these angels, Jesus not with them, because Jesus evidently doesn't like to go into towns like Sodom or whatever it is. But there came 2 angels to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And here's the problem with Lot, or Lut, is that he sat in the gate. That's a position of authority. That's a city alderman. That's a council member. In other words, he had prestige in the city and was accepted and known in the gates and had some sort of influence over Sodom. Lot should have never been in Sodom. It said that Lot lived in the plains of the city while Abraham chose the pasture land. And so Lot dwelt in the cities in the plains, which means cities plural, which means he didn't stay in one city. He was a shepherd. He went to this town and stayed here and kept his flocks out in the field. Then he went to that town. But everything was always drawing him where? To the towns, or as it says in King James, to the cities. If we're attracted to the city life, it better only be because there's more population there for us to reach for God, right? If you're attracted to the city life because you like Las Vegas lights and you like all of the conveniences and like to rub elbows and all of that, New Jerusalem is a city, but there's also countryside in heaven. Our affection for the city is not for some people. I mean, they just love the city. That's not for me. The city is a place to reach for God. And I'm not saying living in a city is wrong, but I'm just saying there's different strokes for different folks. And Abraham liked the pasture land and living in tents. Lot, something that attracted him about the city life. And he dwelled in the cities of the plain, and then it said he pitched his tent toward Sodom. He lived in the cities. It was this city, that city, the next one. But when he got his eyes on Sodom, that was the city he wanted to live in. And all the other cities that he was at, there's one city I really want to live in. And that shows a real backslidden heart. And he pitched his tent toward Sodom, and it means he set up his tent and the flaps opened on the hillside looking down where the lights were. That really shows us who this person is. So now Lot moves into the city, and now he becomes a prestigious member of the city. Does that mean that Lot was homosexual? Does that mean that Lot liked homosexuality? No, it has nothing to do with that. Not everybody in the city of Sodom was evil. Not everybody in the city of Sodom embraced the sins of Sodom, but it was so predominant in that city that it says in Peter that he vexed his righteous soul day to day. In other words, every day living in Sodom was a day living in hell. And yet he preferred living in hell than living up in the pastures, submitting himself to his uncle Abraham. Is that something that applies anywhere in our day and age? Part of the rebellion and the strife between him and Abraham was manifested his heart that that's the type of person he was. And now he's in Sodom, and so he met him in the gate, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. See, you retain your religious upbringing. It's not like this guy all of a sudden is now a heathen. He's still respectful. He's discerning. He knows these are not people that are coming. These are angelic people in looking like persons. And he said to them, "Behold, now my lords, turn in." He's very reverent here. "I pray you into your servant's house and tarry all night and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early and go on your ways." The wording there, and I want you to just chew on what we're looking at in the wording. His wording is stating, "Come to my house for the night, but I want you out of town in the morning." This is no place for angels. This is no place for holy people. This is no place for people of your caliber. Well, we should never live in situations where we got to get people. You know, we got a religious obligation. We need to give them a night's sleep and feed them and wash their feet, but we want them out of here by the morning. That all shows part of the heart of Lot.
Truly a matter of your heart. That's really, he was drawn to the temptations and the lust and all the things that Sodom had to offer, whether he wanted to be right. But he recognized religion and it had more of a religious spirit. It had more of, you know, I know how to act, I know what to do, but I choose to live here. I mean, basically what you're saying. But it's
So in verse 2, then the angel said, "Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. We've come to check out this city." And he pressed upon them greatly. Why? Because he knows what goes on out in the street. Now here's the hard part to juggle here. How can you be a political leader in your town and you know what's going on out in your streets and just compromise and get along with it? See, we go along to get along. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and he entered into his house, and he made them a feast and did bake unleavened bread. That's interesting. Why unleavened bread? Because that is a religious bread.
There's no time. You got to let it.
Okay, that's true. But is it also that he's preparing a religious feast for his religious guests? Normally, we would eat bread that takes lots of time and is fermented because we live in a fermented society. So, verse 4, but before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. Now, this is an astonishing thing. Is this true that you have two outsiders come into town and all of a sudden the lusts of the entire city from every quarter? Are you kidding me? They're coming in from the north quarter and the south quarter. They're coming in from the, you know, in Jerusalem you've got a Syrian quarter and a Christian quarter and a Muslim quarter and a Jewish quarter. And here in this town, all of these different ethnicities that are here, wherever they're from, are now so enwrapped in the thought of new flesh in town, new meat. Basically what it's saying in verse 5, and they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came into thee this night? That's gross. Bring them out unto us. And they called unto Lot and said, where are the men which came into thee this night? Something about men. Bring them out unto us that we may know them. And this is the same word that's used when it says that Adam knew Eve his wife. We want to see them, get acquainted with them, and we'd like to give them the key of the city. And it's about midnight out here on these streets. We'd like to walk them around town and show them our arbors and our universities and our, you know, the night. No. We want to know them. This is sinful passions at its very worst. The flood came in Noah's day. That was over angelic beings and choosing women. Here it is man himself that has taken the complete sinfulness and rot and moral decay. And Lot went out unto the door unto them and shut the door after him. He's okay going outside. He's learned how to barter with these people and shut the door after them. And he said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. So the fact that they want to know them and the fact that he says don't do wickedly confirms the reason for why they wanted to, quote, know them. Verse 8, behold now, and here is the most unbelievable text in the entire Bible.
It is.
Behold now, I have two daughters which have not known a man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. I have got a real predicament on my hands. They're going to storm the house. These are angels. I'm answerable to God for the protection of these. What can I do to sort this out? And he makes the woeful decision, maybe knowing that if I offer my daughters, they're not interested in my daughters. But the very fact that he offered them is one of the most unbelievable things in the entirety of 66 books of the Bible. And who did it? Somebody that was Abraham's nephew, that started out on the journey to the promised land, Canaan, who got strife in his heart because he didn't like the way Abraham's herdsmen were doing and started being attracted to the cities, put his tent toward Sodom, moved into Sodom, got voted on to the council, is known in the gates and is now standing in front of his door, offering his daughters for them to do whatever they want to abuse them, to get their kicks. No wonder, as it was in the days of Lot. Now, you say nothing like that in our day. No, this thing, by the time it's over, will degenerate. If in fact they knew they were angels, then you're entering into a perversion that is opposite of what happened in Genesis chapter 6. So in verse 9, and they said, and we're close here pretty quick, stand back. And this is the Sodomites, or the men of Sodom, stand back. In other words, get out of my way is what that means. We're coming in regardless of what you're saying. And that's that spirit that will not take no for an answer. It's complete unrestraint. And they said again, and I like this statement, this is King James, so this won't translate this way for your other Bibles. It says, this one fellow came in to sojourn. I like that. This fellow came in to sojourn. In other words, notice this, Lot came into our town just to sojourn. He was not intending to stay here long term. And then it makes a statement, he will needs be a judge. In other words, you could interpret it this way, you came into this town just as a sojourner to live for a while, and now you're going to be our judge. Have you ever heard that anywhere? You're going to be our judge? That's what it basically says. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. In other words, you're going to get what you got coming for being our judge. We love and care about people, but in this case, we're looking at a radical homosexuality and a radical perversion that is willing to the whole town to come after two men, good looking, in town, and to break Lot's door down if need be. Look at this last statement. We'll deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. And so now this radicalness, this unrestraint, this hatred, this wokeness, this riotousness is going to break the door down. What's the difference today between today and then? Then they tried to come in the door. Now it comes in right through our web browser and our quarter-inch cable jack, and the door's wide open now to just about every home. Verse 10, but the men put forth their hand. Thank God for angelic intervention, even for somebody like Lot. The men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And when that door shut, it's a symbol of the door that's going to be shut in this last day. Verse 11, and they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. Now this also is very interesting. After they're judged with blindness, and the whole society today is really judged with blindness. They're blind to the things of God, blind to the Bible, blind to common sense. But notice what it says now. So they wearied themselves to find the door. I would think they would weary themselves to find their way back to the quarter that they came out of. No, even judgment today is not turning people around. Now they're still reaching for the door. Okay, I can't see them, but I still have this burning lust inside that even if I can't use my eyes, I'm still going to get what I came here for. And this is just unbelievable perversion in this chapter. Verse 12, and the men said unto Lot, do you have any here besides who's in the house? You have sons-in-law or sons or daughters or whatever you have in the city, bring them out of this place. In other words, these angels were under orders and under covenant with what Abraham had prayed. God is going to answer. Now, I'm not going to get you out of this. I'm going to get your whole family out of it. That ought to be a good news for every one of us. Even when our kids aren't quite doing right, God still has them under our prayers and under our covenant. Bring them out of this place. Verse 13, for we will destroy this place because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. I'm going to tell you the reason why we're in town now. He didn't understand that right then. You come in, have supper, we're going to wash your feet, and you can be out here tomorrow morning. He's letting them know now the reason we're in this town is because we wanted to see if it deserves the judgment that it is going to get, and we have come on a mission to destroy this city. And Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, which married his daughters. I don't want to get into this because I'm going to preach on this before too long. And said, up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he seemed as one that mocked to his sons-in-law? His sons-in-law were married to his daughters. All right, so he's got 4 daughters there. Or were they married to these 2 sons-in-laws and had not known a man? Because
Well, one of them had two daughters. He said, take your wife and yeah.
okay, you can extrapolate the Bible to me what you want. Anyway, regardless, the sons-in-laws who were not gay, who were not part of this radical movement, we can assume there were hundreds, perhaps thousands or tens of thousands that were not a part of this group that had come that night. But even though his sons-in-law were not of that persuasion at all, they still had watched Lot's life, and there was nothing credible about Lot for them to be convicted of anything. And when Lot spoke, it was like, are you telling us a joke? You're a Bible thumper, you believe in Revelation, you're a prophecy guy, are you? And he seemed as one that mocked. They thought it was a big joke.
Yeah.
So the angels hastened Lot, and out of the city they went, and fire and brimstone fell. I don't have time to expound on all of that. But this is very, very interesting. But the thing there is that the days of Lot are going to be repeated. Will it get so evil in our cities? And it is already. Because like I said, we're not looking at the entire population of the city being like those that gathered that night. But I don't care what city you go in, you've got a place where there's radical craziness that is no different than that. And if it brought judgment in Noah's day and it brought judgment in Lot's day, then it is very predictable that it will bring judgment in our. Peter said he vexed his righteous soul. He didn't accept it, but nor did he leave it.
Nor did he stand up against it.
This is probably the first time he ever stood up against them, was that night. But it's not so much whether he should stand up, it's whether he should even be in the middle of that mess. He came to sojourn. Why did he stay there? He was only going temporarily, and yet he bought him a house.